I'm going to show you step by step how to assemble a tier cake by layering cake and fillings, creating a support structure, stacking cakes on top of each other, and adding final touches. Start by layering your cakes. I like to start with my top tiers so that they have time to set before stacking them. You'll need a cake board the same size as each cake, so this 6-inch cake is sitting on a 6-inch cake board. Use a dollop of buttercream to attach your first layer of cake to the cake board, and then alternate cake and filling. Make sure the layers are level by trimming the tops with a serrated knife before you assemble the cake. It's really important that the sides of the cake are straight, so that it's not leaning over to one side. So as you place each cake layer down onto the cake, spin it around on your turntable to check it from different sides, to make sure it's sitting directly on the cake layer beneath it. I like to press down on my cake after adding each layer to push out any filling that would otherwise ooze out later, under the weight of the frosting. After assembling the cake, I chill it in the fridge for an hour, or in the freezer for half an hour, while I assemble the next cake. You can build the bottom tier straight onto the board you're going to use to display the cake, which should be at least 4 inches bigger than the bottom cake. This one is 8 inches bigger. It's a 12-inch board with an 8-inch cake. You'll need a thicker cake board for this than for the cakes above it, because those don't need to support any weight, so they're just thin cardboard rounds with greaseproof lining. This large cake board is a cake drum, and it's thicker and stronger, so it will be able to hold the heavy cake on top of it. Again, as you're assembling this cake, make sure the cake layers are level and sitting straight on top of each other. I'm using my perfect chocolate cake recipe for this, and my 4-minute buttercream, and the recipe and tutorial links for both are in the video description and in the top of the screen. Chill this cake while you frost your other cake or cakes, depending on how many tiers you're going to do. I attached the little cake board onto a bigger one with a roll of masking tape, so that I can easily peel it off later. Frost your cake with a crumb coat, which is a very thin layer of frosting to trap in any crumbs that come off the cake, so that they don't get into the final coat of frosting. It's easiest to frost a cold cake, because it's firmer and less crumbly than when it's at room temperature. Also, by chilling the cake before frosting it, the filling will set and hold the layers in place, so that nothing moves around while you're trying to frost it. The crumb coat doesn't need to be perfect, but aim for straight sides and a level top of the cake. Cover the rest of your cakes with crumb coats and then final coats of frosting, getting the sides as straight as you can, and using an offset spatula or frosting smoother to get nice sharp edges at the top of the cake. I have a very detailed tutorial on how to get smooth frosting, and I've put the link in the top of the screen and in the video description. You can add decorations to your cake at this point, or after assembling them, and I'll show you both options later in this video. To stack a tier cake, you need a support structure to hold the weight of each cake, and you can do this with straws or with dowels made with wood or plastic. Push your first support into the bottom tier of the cake, pushing it all the way down until you hit the board at the bottom. Pinch it where it meets the top of the cake, and pull it back out and then cut it where you pinched it, so that it's exactly the same height as the frosted cake. Then line the rest of your supports up against the first one, and cut them so that they're all the same size. Or you can mark the point with a pen and then cut them. I like to use boba straws because they're thicker and wider than normal straws, so they're very strong, but they're also very easy to cut with scissors. Take a cake board the same size as the next cake, and line it up in the middle of the bottom cake, and trace around it with a knife to leave a circle drawn in the frosting on the top of your biggest cake. Push your first support back into the hole you made earlier, and then push the rest into the cake. I use the support in the middle of a cake for 10-inch cakes or bigger, and sometimes for 8-inch cakes as well, but it's not really necessary for smaller cakes. Then you need 4 more supports placed around the cake in a square formation, keeping them 2 inches apart from each other and at least an inch within the circle you drew onto the cake. When you push the supports into the cake, push them in just a little bit and then lean down to look at them from the side, to make sure they're standing up straight, not leaning to one side, so that they're as supportive as possible. Remember to push them all the way down until they hit the cake board, and if your cake is level on the top and you cut all of the supports the same height, they'll all go in right up to the top of the frosting on the cake, but they won't stick up over it. If you're enjoying this tutorial, please click the thumbs up button and subscribe to my channel for a new cake decorating tutorial every week. When you're ready to stack your cake, take your next cake out of the fridge and slide your offset spatula around underneath the cake to loosen it from the larger cake board you frosted it on. Angle your spatula to lift the cake and pull off the roll of masking tape from underneath, if you used one. You can pick it up like this because the frosting has been chilled and set so it's firm. Spread some fresh buttercream in the middle of the cake to make it sticky. Then lower the top cake onto the bottom cake and line it up in the middle of the cake so it's centered. Repeat for another tier if you like, tracing around a cake board the same size as the cake, or you can use whatever sized pan you baked the cake in. Then push in a support to measure the height of the cake, and then use that one to cut equal-sized supports. This is a 6-inch cake, and it will have a 4-inch cake on top. So I'm just using 4 supports with no central support, because the next cake is so small. Lift the small cake off its board, using your offset spatula to slice under the frosting between the 2 cake boards to separate the cake on its little cake board from the bigger cake board. Spread some fresh buttercream on the top of the cake below, and then place the top cake on it. Don't worry about any messy seams or little gaps between the tiers yet, we're about to tidy those up. Put some buttercream in a piping bag with a round tip, or just a hole cut in the end of the piping bag for the buttercream to come out of. You'll need a frosting smoother for this, any material as long as it has a straight edge. Pipe buttercream all around the bottom of one of the cakes, resting the bag down so that it's touching the cake below to completely cover up the join between the 2 tiers. Then use your frosting smoother to scrape around the cake, resting it down so that you're going all the way down to the bottom and scraping a few times to smooth the frosting, taking off all of the excess that's sticking out from the sides of the cake, but you'll be pushing the buttercream into the gaps in between the tiers to fill them in so that the bottom of the cake is neat and smooth. I'll show you some variations of this in a moment. Tidying up the join between the tiers will give you a perfect blank canvas, and when you've finished, just choose the prettiest side to be the front of your cake and start decorating. I have hundreds of cake decorating tutorials to choose from on my online cake school, and the link for that is in the top of the screen and in the video description, and also on my YouTube channel. So subscribe to that for a new cake decorating tutorial every week. If you use colours in your final coat of frosting, not just white, you can tidy up the joins between the tiers in the same way. Put the supports into your bottom cake, which you can do before or after chilling the cake to set the frosting. What's essential is that the top tier has been properly chilled, so that you can separate the frosting from the board you decorated the cake on, and then lift up the cake and lower it onto the cake below it, and if necessary, move it around to sit where you want it to. When everything's in place, pipe frosting around the join of the cakes. You can do this even for patterned or decorated cakes, like this striped buttercream cake. For the top tier, the frosting at the bottom of the cake happens to be white, so I'm piping on white buttercream and smoothing that to cover the gap between the top and bottom tier. If the bottom had been one of the green watercolour stripes, I would have saved some of those colours of buttercream to do the touch-ups, piping or spreading them around the join of the cakes, and then scraping around with a frosting smoother in the same way. I like to add decorations after stacking my tier cakes, so that I can see how everything lines up and how the sizing looks in reality, before scaling my decorations. That also gives me the chance to decide which is the prettiest side. So that can be the front, and then I choose the placement of my decorations. For textured frosting or other decorations on the cake, you might choose to assemble the cake first and then add the decorations, so that it's easier to lower the top tiers onto the cake without damaging the frosting or decorations. But if you want to decorate and then stack the cake, maybe because you want to transport the tiers separately and then assemble them at the location and then decorate them, a cake lifter is really helpful. After you put the supports into the bottom cake and spread on some fresh buttercream to make it sticky, slide the cake lifter underneath the top cake so that you can lift it, and then lower it onto the bottom cake without holding onto the sides of the cake. You can push it off the cake lifter using an offset spatula, or if the frosting has set, you can use your hands. I like to chill the cake first, so that the texture or decorations have set, so that after lowering the cake down onto the bottom tier, you can adjust it like this without damaging the frosting. To cover the join at the bottom of the cake, I'm piping another ruffle around it. It doesn't have to be smooth frosting that fills in any gaps around the cake board. For this ombre cake, I'm going to use another type of piping to cover the join of the 2 tiers. I show how to achieve this pretty ombre frosting in my free online course on 10 frosting techniques, and to take the course, just go to britishgirlbakes.com or click the link in the video description. After stacking the cakes, I'm using leftover orange buttercream, the same colour I used to frost the top of the bottom tier and the bottom of the top tier, and this piping bag is fitted with a small round tip, a Wilton No. 8. I'm piping a beaded border by squeezing out little blobs of buttercream all the way around the cake, and after covering up the seam, I'll choose my favourite side for the front and then cover that with decorations. These are fondant, and since the frosting has set, it's not sticky anymore. So I'm brushing the backs of the fondant decorations with a tiny bit of water to make them sticky and then attaching them to the cake. Finally, one more piping technique to cover the join of the tiers. And for this cake, I'm using an open star tip, a 4B by Wilton, for wavy piping. I cover all sorts of piping in my online course on 10 cake decorating techniques, and you can find out more about that course on my online cake school as well. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe to my channel for a new cake decorating tutorial every week.